Yo, what is good, everyone? I appreciate everyone for tuning in. I'm Marcus, and here we're talking attorney reactions and some finance content. And this video is going to be interesting because I know y'all going to look at this video thumbnail and be like, "Man, this dude ain't got no connection between these two, or what? Who should have learned what between these two? He just wanted to use two trending topics in the same title, which is true, which is true. But I do have some interesting information. I thought this would be a dope video because people will be like, "Well, what are the connections? Or you just trying to use two high trending topic names in the same title?" Both things are true. Yes to that, but yes, these two do have some similarities. As always, if you get some value out of this content, hey, I invite you to subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, the bell notification, all of that good stuff. This is going to be a short video because your boy is tired. Now, disclaimer: licensed attorney, not legal advice, financial advice, infotainment purposes, giving my opinion and takes on topics. Now, anyone who is smart, if you're aware that you're under an FBI investigation, when you see someone else go down who is high profile, me personally, even if I was the attorney for the other person, I would immediately start thinking, like, how can my client learn from this situation? Or have we experienced or performed some of the similar traits that actually took this more important, more prominent person down? So, the three major things that Tiffany Henyard and her counsel should have taken from this, and really the most important people are the people who are tuned into the story. Number one is the time. Every time I do a video about Tiffany Henyard, all in the comments is always probably like 40% of the people like, "Man, the feds aren't going to do anything. What's taking so long? Why aren't they doing anything? Do they really care?" It's 100% inevitable, in my personal opinion, that charges are going to come from this. We can see, if we look at the Diddy situation, if we just take a gander over to what was going on with him, these accusations date back almost a decade. So generally, Tiffany Henyard hasn't been in office that long. Hey, what's good? What's good? Appreciate you tuning in. Appreciate you tuning in. Shout out to the first comment of the day. The first comment of the day for tuning in. Always got to give you a round of applause for that. But the number one thing is time. That's the first thing that their counsel should have taken away from this, that anybody looking at it should take away. Typically, with most federal criminal charges, most times, not all, depending on the seriousness, but generally, most federal crimes have a 5-year statute of limitations. So we still early on in the game. One of the questions that someone asked is, why is the federal government pursuing this as opposed to state government? Well, it's a few reasons. I guess number one, typically, if something is a state crime, it's also a federal crime. For example, bank robbery. You rob a bank, you got state crime of theft of funds and all of this stuff. But a bank is federally insured, so it's a federal crime as well. Armed robbery, federal crime as well. So there are some nuances. Typically, you see the federal government take over when, one, it's a higher monetary value at play. So if someone embezzles whatever $50,000, nobody really gonna give a shit about it at the federal level. If someone embezzles 2-3 million, it may raise federal eyes. Two, resources. A lot of times the state government doesn't have the resources to actually investigate some of the things. If it's, for example, healthcare fraud, a state government don't know anything about healthcare fraud, the billing associated with it, the procedure codes, how the finessing in healthcare could potentially be done. So if it's a uniquely nuanced area, you'll see the federal government take over. Another one is, if the federal government just believes local law enforcement is incompetent. Would you all think that, like, the federal government would be 100% cool with allowing what the cops in the village of Dolton to investigate Tiffany Henyard? That was actually laughable to even say it. So that's another reason why the feds take over. But in this case, is because it's politics. If you are somebody, i.e., Diddy, or you're a political appointee, hey, they have a specialized division in the federal government for you, just for you at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they're going to probably take over that case. But number one thing that they should have learned is time is not of the essence. They really have all the time in the world. Generally, they probably got a 5 year statute of limitations, depending on what they charge, conspiracy, RICO. They could stretch out some of those criminal acts even farther and still potentially make a case. That's number one. Number two, I think that Tiffany Henyard already knew this, but if she already knew this, but she really knows it now. And I wanted to pull up two interesting stories from both cases, and I think this will be let's pull up the easiest one first, the letter from Tiffany Henyard. That one will be a little bit easier. Let's share this screen. All right. So on the screen right here, we got a letter from Tiffany Henyard to Mr. Keith Freeman. Now, if you aren't aware, Mr. Keith Freeman was Tiffany Henyard's top ally. Her attorney already threw him under the bus, saying that she wasn't familiar with how to run government. She was taking all of the plays from him. As Tiffany Henyard's top aide, he was the person who is in the closest proximity to the potential wrongdoer. You know what that means? If there's any dirt about you to be found out, it's going to be this person who has it. This letter right here is a letter from June of 2021, where Tiffany Henyard essentially attempted or sent this letter to terminate Keith Freeman from his position as her top aide. Now, however, he still holds a position with the trustees. He's still acting in that role. Everybody is of the position that this dude is working with the federal government ever since he was indicted on federal bankruptcy charges. But the second lesson is here is the people who are closest to you, who were your biggest supporters, are going to be the people who come around and kick you in the ass on the back end of a federal investigation. Now, I want to juxtapose this with another video. Let's take a look at this video real quick. It's a dope channel. If y'all aren't subscribed or haven't checked it out, I'm going to go ahead and give them a shout out. It's called the Law and Crime Network. Now, we talked about Keith Freeman being the aide of Tiffany Henyard, her closest ally, probably in the closest inner circle. Now, let's take a pivot and look at this Diddy case. It looks like his chief of staff, who I believe was hired in 2020, is probably going to have a level of exposure. More recently, she was named in Little Rod's lawsuit where she wore her Louis Vuitton or whatever Gucci fanny pack and allegedly supplied drugs and other narcotics and things like that to party goers. So let's take a quick look at this video, and you're going to see exactly how the people who are closest to you when you're doing wrong are going to be the people who are going to burn you the most.
Promoted to Diddy's chief of staff back in 2020, and she's very important to him. Combs has even written about her on social media. Meet Christina Coram, chief of staff at Combs Enterprises. Christina, aka KK, keeps everything in my life and my business running. She's been my right hand for the last 8 years and has consistently proven to execute and get S-word done. Don't know how I'd function without her. In another post, Diddy wrote, "Happy birthday to my ace Boon Coon, my right hand, my day-to-day manager that keeps my world twirling, and she's always got my back. She makes sure that I smile every day and I don't go into those dark places. Today is your day. It's your mother effing birthday. Go KK, it's your birthday. Love you, at Christina Coram." Combs clearly values Christina Coram's work and his relationship with her. The lawsuit Lil Rod filed makes some disturbing and salacious claims against Coram, and again, Combs has denied what's in that lawsuit. First, Lil Rod has claimed that Mr. Combs's chief of staff, Christina Coram, also known as KK, instructs her staff to retrieve drugs so she can provide them to Mr. Combs for his consumption. A footnote in the lawsuit that Little Rod filed says defendant Coram instructed her staff, Brendan Paul, Frankie Santella, and Moy Bond, to spike bottles of champagne with ecstasy. Upon information and belief, this occurred the day of December 31st, 2022, New Year's Eve party. Lil Rod claims he complained to Coram about sexual advances from Combs.
Now, we don't even got to go into all of that because I really don't want to cover all of that shit because it's kind of disgusting. But that goes to show you the chief of staff, the person who's the right hand man, in the words of Diddy, the ace boon coon, the person closest to you has the most to know about you. A lot of times people always say, what's the old saying? Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Well, you probably want to keep your friends closer because your enemies aren't close to you. They way the hell out there. So how could somebody they don't really have the opportunity to hurt you or put you under any type of scrutiny because you keep them outside of arm's reach. The persons in your inner circle though, those are the ones who hold all of the information, the good, the bad, the ugly. And I think that's lesson number two here. That if she didn't know, she should know. The person closest to you, whoever you think were your allies, the Lewis Lacey's, the Keith Freeman, this new cop who I'm gonna talk about tomorrow, who she randomly appointed and it looks like illegally. At the end of the day, those are gonna be the people because everybody want to save their own ass. At the end of the day, y'all think that we already assume and people of the belief that Keith Freeman is working with the federal government. But you don't think if we pivot and look at Diddy's story, that the minute they hold some prison time over this lady's head, she's not gonna tell on Diddy ass. She's gonna tell absolutely everything for some type of immunity. That's number two. The third thing, and I think the most important, because I'm gonna give this a really quick elementary breakdown because I don't want to be on here all night. The third thing that I think is probably the most important, Diddy got caught up in a FRICO charge, racketeering, running criminal organizations for the furtherance of some common goal. Normally, it's money. Drug dealers get caught up in RICO, they want money. Mafia get caught up in RICO, they want money. This is a little bit weird because the common goal was to satisfy Mr. Combs's proclivities, all his. That's a little weird, but it is a valid claim, and I think when we talked about looking at a RICO claim, what makes up a RICO claim, it is actually possible for someone who's serving in a government position to actually get indicted on a racketeering charge and to potentially be found guilty of a racketeering charge. So, at the most elementary level, let's take a look at what those elements are and what, if any, would be the two underlying criminal conducts that the federal government could use with regard to Tiffany Henyard. And I think one thing is probably really easy to potentially prove just via evidence from what we can see in open source. But one, it has to be a conspiracy, two or more persons or a group. I think we just satisfy that off the break when we look at the amount of allies that Tiffany Henyard had. The Keith Freemans, the Lewis Lacey's, everybody who sat on the board of trustees, whether it was for the village of Dolton or the Thornton Township or what have you. I think that there's a quorum of potential criminality here with two or more persons, which would meet the federal definition of a criminal organization. So I think that is easy. The second one is they take uh, they take a step in the furtherance of the common scheme. Here, the common scheme, the objective would be money. It's always about money, unless your Diddy is about something else. But it's generally all about money. And do we think the persons involved closest with Tiffany Henyard, let's say Lewis Lacey, Keith Freeman, and I don't know, pick a trustee who was an ally at some point and may have recently defected. But do we think that any of those persons, an appointee to a particular agency, do we think that any of those persons engage in conduct to take a substantial step in the furtherance of getting income, getting money illegally? I think the answer is yes. The easiest way to look at it would be who is the signatory who is approving all of these things. If Tiffany Henyard asserts that she doesn't touch any money, she doesn't deal with the credit cards, previously she never had her name on anything, that means someone else was essentially the signatory for these credit card purchases. Somebody else was doing the authorization. Someone else was responsible and probably signed their name to a document. So I think that that element would be satisfied. One, there's multiple people to satisfy the definition of a criminal organization. Two, did they take a substantial act in the furtherance of the end goal, which is to get money? I think that would be a yes. Three is the one that's going to be a little bit unique, because with RICO, and we talked about this before, typically you have to have RICO is easy because it's not easy, but it's beautiful for the federal government because it gives you such a long ass window where you have a 10-year look back period where at least two criminal offenses can be proven for the furtherance of the overarching goal. And the overarching goal here is a monetary benefit. So, what are the two things that we think we can identify just with what we know from common knowledge? What are the two things we think we can identify that were probably criminal or have a specter of criminality that would be easiest to prove? For me, I think the two things that are probably the most easy to prove. One would be, it was an article that we saw. I'm not even going to pull the article up, but it was an article that we saw and we read where business owners essentially said that Tiffany Henyard was strong on them for what they determined or thought to be some type of campaign contribution or a contribution to their charity. They paid it the first time. The second time they said, hey, Tiffany Henyard and crew allegedly kept going back to the well asking for more money. One, they actually have a witness in that case. If they have a witness in that case, they can prove that this person, in fact, didn't get the license they needed to perform their business because they refrained from providing the money to the charity or to the campaign or what have you. I think that'll be one that's very, very easy to prove because you already have a witness in place. Why else would a person say that? The second crime that, if I say what would be an easy crime, because I don't think the travel thing is that big of a deal, honestly. The only reason I don't think the travel stuff is that big of a deal because I'm not sure if I'm not sure if Tiffany Henyard taking a bunch of people to Vegas to party and ball out is necessarily criminal on its face. I think it may be more of an ethics thing, but I don't think it's necessarily criminal on its face. So, with that being said, I would look at direct money. What would be something that's money directly related? So, the second crime I would probably look at is crimes related to government contracts. Who got the contracts? Who got more no bid contracts? The other thing is I would look at the appointments and the wages of the appointees. Because oftentimes, and I don't know this to be true, but normally when you see politicians, normally, this is just an example. I'm not saying she did this, but normally when you have someone in a political office and they appoint someone to a position or they give them a position and that person doesn't have the requisite skill or background or LinkedIn profile to justify that position and that salary, more often than that, there's some kickback of the salary going back to the person who actually gave them that position. That would be it's a double benefit. One, if I put you in a position, if you really don't know what you're doing, that helps me because ignorance, I could probably leverage it. Two, if I put you in that position and pay you $100,000 and you never made more than $30,000 in your life, you're gonna feel like you owe me. And three, what's another thing I could get from putting you in that position? You never made more than $30,000. If I gave you a position where you make $100,000, you can go ahead kick me back 20 of that. You still gonna make $80,000, and you really don't have to come to work. You really don't have to do shit. So I think the third takeaway from this is Tiffany Henyard could potentially be looking at some type of RICO exposure because I think she definitely has two of the three main elements present for the federal government to establish a RICO case. Definitely, I think the organization, the criminal organization, is easily met, and I think substantial acts in the furtherance of the end goal, which is to get money to make profit. I think that is easy. I mean, an elementary school kid can look at this case and her fact patterns and find that out. So I thought that that was a kind of an interesting, dynamic in looking at those two cases because there are some takeaways here. Just to recap, number one, time is not of the essence. That's lesson number one. They looking at conduct in Diddy from 10 years ago. Tiffany Henyard hasn't been in office that long. I mean, she's been in office almost her full term, but in the scheme of statute of limitations, they on average they normally got about 5 years generally for most crimes. So time is not of the essence. So there's no need to rush, especially if it's a potential RICO case. They can or conspiracy. They have mechanisms to stretch out that statute of limitation. Number two, this one she should have already been aware of, but everyone in your closest circles is going to become informants for law enforcement. And the other thing, oh man, I just thought of another charge that they could throw in on a RICO, which would be easy actually. But I'll talk about that when I get to the number three. But number two, the persons who are closest in your circle are going to be the persons who's going to give you the most exposure and going to hurt you the most. Let's see. With all the news coverage that Dalton is receiving, what's taking so long? And they keep saying the feds are there. We have seen footage or any evidence that they are actually and like. Well, I mean, I think the biggest thing is the issuance of the subpoenas. I think the issuance of the subpoenas. There have been federal subpoenas issued in Tiffany Henyard's case. I'm gonna just be honest. I've never now. I've I've actually had damn near unilateral authority to issue subpoenas in cases, and I have never issued a subpoena in a case that I've never issued a subpoena in a case just for shits and giggles. If I mean, like, if I issued a subpoena in a case and asked for documents for you to provide me with something, it's the reason. It's because I'm gonna give those documents to an analyst or an investigator, and I probably want them to comb through it. More likely, in this case, it's probably an analyst because it's probably some type of monetary track record. So it just takes time, and think about it. The federal government, the the unit that's looking at this, if it's being done by the federal government, they aren't just looking at one person like Tiffany Henyard. The same unit that looks at fraud and public corruption also looks at healthcare fraud. And healthcare fraud with just the Medicaid program alone, you can have a case that's worth tens of millions of dollars because it's federal funding for healthcare, which has the second highest budget next to DOD. So, I mean, if you looked on the prosecutor's desk and you had like Tiffany Henyard, maybe some other healthcare cases, maybe another Ponzi scheme case, that case is probably going to have the lowest priority of the three, more likely than that, just because of the nature of what's at issue. It's not going to have, despite all the money that it looks like she's finessing, on the full scheme of things, it's not a large amount of money. I'm gonna just be honest. Like, just be honest. I've I've had healthcare cases that'll make whatever, even if we said allegedly Tiffany Henyard stole the entire budget for the village of Dolton for 1 year, that doesn't compare to what the potential losses and recoveries could be for a healthcare case. And most times, the fraud and public corruption unit, they're also doing healthcare fraud. They're also doing fraud and other programs. So something like a small town mayor stealing what, let's say $3 million. Like, yeah, it's terrible, but it's not going to be anything for anybody to rush. So I think that's something that we gotta like just kind of pump our brakes on. I just don't think that they're not going to do an indictment. The fact that there was an indictment, I believe it was allegedly a grand jury subpoena, if I'm not mistaken. I think someone did provide an article or something to that effect. And like I said, if it's a grand jury subpoena, they probably got all their bank records and everything. So it is what it is. But yeah, they got generally 5 years from the date of the offense to charge it. 5 years from the date of offense, what would be the rush if right now we all still believe that she's engaging in criminal conduct? It would be one thing. Now, had she resigned after year two, she resigned, and I was a prosecutor, I would have been like, oh shit, let's go ahead and move on this case. Because now that she resigned, she's probably not doing any more illegal activities. So I got these 2 years where I got to look, and this is starting my statute of limitations period. But she's still in office. She's still working. No one is of the belief that she's changed her tune or anything like that. We still have evidence that taxpayer funds are being used for private events, or if not a private event, an event that's associated with the campaign, which would be an illegal campaign contribution. So, because she's potentially still engaging in criminal behavior, I mean, whatever she does that's stupid tomorrow, we got 5 years from that date before we have to move forward. There's no need to rush on it. All we can do is line our ducks up in a row. Let's take care of some of these other cases that probably are more a higher priority because she keeps digging a hole for herself. So that's point number two. But that hopefully that answers your question. I don't think it's a thing that the feds aren't looking. They issued a subpoena. I believe it was a grand jury subpoena, allegedly. And if it was a grand jury subpoena, I think I had one case. I'm trying to think. Have I ever had a case where a grand jury subpoena was issued that wasn't indicted? I maybe had a few, maybe two. I could think of one. I could think of one for sure. So I say one, maybe two, and a damn near 15-year career. So it doesn't happen that often. So I don't think that it's going to be that big of a deal. I think we're more anxious because we see these news stories every day about what's going on as opposed to the prosecutors. They aren't worried about it because they got 5 years from whatever the date was of her last illegal or allegedly illegal act, which means they have more than enough time. And the third thing was number one, time isn't of the essence. We just talked about that thanks to my AP's question. Number two, everybody who's close to you is going to stab you in the back and drop a dime on you. And number three, it looks like Tiffany Henyard does have some RICO exposure there. And I actually thought of the second crime that could be easy to solve if we look back in that. Well, three things. Was there a criminal organization, two or more people? Yes, I think that's obvious. Did someone or they do a substantial act in the furtherance of the goal of getting illegal monies? Yes, I think that would be easy to look at. I think the hard one, well, not hard one, but the most challenging one was proving what are the, at a minimum, two criminal offenses that occurred within a particular time frame to make a RICO case true. And one was essentially strong arming businesses to donate to her charity. We have an article where an individual talked about that and how he was denied a license. That would be an easy case. And another case would be actually interesting because this is kind of, I didn't think about it until, I don't know. I didn't think about it until this question came up. But if you're aware of a federal indictment, we saw this in Diddy's case. He was aware of a federal indictment and he started contacting witnesses. And everybody was like, well, how does Diddy know who the witnesses are? He don't have a witness list. He just calling everybody who he know he might have did some of the shit that they're alleging with. So he's just calling around like, yo, remember that party we was at, bro? We got to make sure. And one of the things the courts was concerned with were witness tampering. And that could be a potential easy one as well. If they can find someone who Tiffany Henyard potentially contacted once she was aware that some type of federal investigation going on with either changing the narrative or making them misrepresent the facts, that could always be a really easy one that they could potentially use as one of the underlying charges in the RICO case as well. So there's a lot of easy things out there. I think, let me see. Weren't those indictments on police chief and the councilman unrelated indictments? So is this the Fed's angle to go after crimes they can prosecute easier in hopes to make them turn evidence? That's always the case. I think the police chief and Freeman were both indicted on federal bankruptcy fraud charges because they have a. And when you go to bankruptcy court, I never did bankruptcy law, but they have it's called a 347 hearing. I think I'm about to lie to y'all. Let me see. Let me make sure that's what it's called. But it's essentially called a 347 hearing, I believe. Let me see. I don't want to make it up. I don't want to make it up. I said 347. I was close. I said 347. I don't do bankruptcy. It's a 341 here. It's a bankruptcy 341 here. And so both of them were indicted on federal bankruptcy charges, on fraud, for filing bogus bankruptcy charges to essentially hide money that they didn't claim. They had some accounts that they didn't disclose on their bankruptcy form. And they were also charged with perjury for lying at their 341 meeting. The 341 meeting is essentially I'm filing for bankruptcy. I meet with all the creditors. There's someone from the court there, and I have to disclose all my assets, and I don't disclose them. That particular 341 meeting is under oath, is under penalty of perjury. So if I lie there, I'm also on the hook for perjury. But yeah, that's all of that was. All that was, hey, we got these guys on federal bankruptcy charges, which could carry substantial prison time. And it's all about flipping somebody up. It's all about flipping somebody up. And they don't care about a damn Keith Freeman or a Lewis Lacey because those aren't the elected officials. They're talking about fraud and public corruption. They want people who are elected officials. And a close number two is an appointed official, but an appointed official in this case wouldn't necessarily be. I don't think it rises to a level of sexy for me to say, hey, we got this guy on federal bankruptcy charges. Nah, the whole name of the game is to flip people up. That's what they do in every case. That's why Diddy is screwed because unfortunately for him, I think Diddy might be the biggest fish in the pond, unless it's somebody else on one of them videos doing something wild. So, but generally, most times you got something to flip up and go on to the next person. Yeah, you sign paperwork, the financials you have are truthful, and you did not move tangible property of value and other assets to other names to avoid surrendering their value. That is 100%. The more asset value you have, the chances you may need to pay a higher monthly towards the bankruptcy if reorganized or surrendered non essential assets. That's correct. When you go in bankruptcy, well, the type of bankruptcy when you go into bankruptcy, it's not a get out of jail free card. You got to make a payment for 5 years, 7 years, I think it is, something like that. I don't know, not a bankruptcy attorney, but they want to know all your assets because they're trying to figure out what the hell can you pay. How much can you pay all of these creditors? And these guys had substantial bank accounts that they did not list. 5 years, okay. See, I said 5 years or 7 years. I got a good memory from all, from all those bankruptcy classes I took many moons ago. I said 5 years first. I knew it was 5 or 7. So I think seven is for adverse possession, but I knew it was 5 or 7, something like that. But yeah, so I think that's absolutely right. I think it's just more of a let's see if we can lean on these guys and get them to flip something up to the bigger fish that we want, which is the elected official. So I don't know. It's absolutely a shit show there. I actually took a look at the meeting that was going on, and Tiffany Henyard was in rare form tonight, boy. I was like, man, she's on one tonight. I'll probably cover that on Friday because tomorrow I'm gonna put a video out talking about her new appointment of a top cop, which probably is illegal. I don't know. At this point, though, you know what I would do? Like, because this top cop that she appointed has a sketchy past. I'm not going to go into it. But with this level of scrutiny that I got, if I were to appoint somebody new, I would probably want to appoint somebody who is just above board. Like, at what point I don't know. I'm so confused. Like, at what point? It seemed like at some point you should make a. If it were me and I were Tiffany Henyard and I'm in all of this controversy, and I'm like, okay, they just got rid of Lacey. We need a new cop. I would literally do like an actual real search, maybe hire a firm, try to get like some actual real candidates, nobody that I fucking know. Like this would be the time where I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna actually appoint somebody and try to get them confirmed through the board and do everything the legitimate way. At some point, you think you would turn the corner and start doing shit the right way. It seems like it's not happening here, which is confusing as hell. Yeah. Seven may be for commercial, but five for personal. It could be. I'm not sure. I knew it was five or seven. For some reason, those two numbers stuck in my head. We got to talk about that too, though. Like, like I don't know. Is that a having a history of nepotism? Is that really like a bad thing? Like, again, we're gonna talk about that tomorrow. But like, is is having a history of nepotism and believing your child actually a bad thing? People do it all the time. I've represented clients who were like 16, 17, and they were like just fully entrenched and submersed in like street shit. And the parents were just like, oh, they were either extremely oblivious, which I don't think. I think the alternative was true. They just like refused to believe what was going on with their actual fucking eyes in front of them. Like, no, not my baby. He's in the glee club. And I was like, your baby got a switch on them damn things. But they just don't want to believe it. So like I don't think that I don't know if it's terrible to blindly believe your kid. And generally, as a parent, you shouldn't do that. If my kids is wrong, I'm be like, y'all wrong. I don't give a fuck if y'all my kids and that. But there's some parents out there who like, nope, they always gonna defend their child, no matter how wrong and how fucking obvious it is that their child is wrong. I don't know if that in and of itself makes someone a bad hire. Very few, not very few, but I think most people are probably going to try to look out for their kids depending on the situation. That's my thoughts. If she wanted to hire me as the city attorney, nah, because I don't know if she gonna pay me. That's number one, and she don't listen. Like those are the two problems. In order for like someone once asked me when Trump was going through all of his things, someone said like, "Yo, would you ever represent Donald Trump?" And I said no, because I'm probably not going to get paid, and he's not going to listen. Those are the two things I asked. You could be everybody needs representation. Now, I'm not saying I would represent them, but generally everybody needs representation, even if you're a creep. And and I want the justice system to work. I literally left a comment and someone was talking about Diddy, and my exact comment was, I just want the justice system in this instance to work. If there's enough evidence there and they find him guilty, it works. If there's insufficient evidence there and they found him not guilty, it works. I just want the system to relatively work without any bullshittery going on. Generally, that's generally what I like to see. Which way? Because most people are like, oh, I want justice, and they only want the sword to cut one way. But that's just not how the justice system works. It has to cut both ways. So, like, yeah, everybody's entitled to representation. I probably wouldn't represent or do that job because I don't know if I'm gonna get paid and you're not gonna listen. If you're not gonna pay me, it's not happening. And if you aren't gonna listen, it's just gonna destroy everything. If every time you open your mouth, you're saying something counter to generally, I just don't want you to say shit. Just don't address it. But generally, if you're gonna do everything counter to what I say, it's probably not gonna be a conducive relationship. So I think I would respectfully decline for those reasons. Well, I mean, they are getting. It's interesting. It depends because there's a difference between like the county attorney, the trustee attorney, the village attorney, the trustee attorney, and her personal attorneys. Her personal attorneys are getting paid in some form of fashion because they're not gonna go sit at uh all them hood ass board meetings for nothing for free. So she's definitely paying her personal attorneys. Now, the attorney that the trustee has is getting compensation from the government. but there is some dispute over the firm that was hired to represent the overall village because they were saying that funds were getting paid. Then a new firm came in and they aren't getting paid, but they're still working, hoping that they're going to get funds in the beginning of the new year, I believe. Either the fiscal year or the new year, one of the two. So some attorneys are getting paid, some aren't. The attorneys who aren't getting paid are the firms who are representing allegedly the the governmental municipality. And the reason that they're doing that work and still there, even though they aren't getting paid, because it's a government contract. It's like a 99.9% chance that they're going to get paid. It's like it's not 100% chance, but generally, if Tiffany Henyard doesn't win an election, those bills are still going to be on the book, and the county is still going to be on the hook for them, and the county is probably going to pay those bills. That's why those attorneys are working absent having any damn compensation up until this point, because there's a government debt is like having a government owe you is probably as good as a as good of a debt obligation that you're ever going to get satisfied in your life. Mhm. Okay, look, I'm okay giving a chance to family and friend members, but they still need to prove their values to the company. Ignoring their bad acts is not helping them. I'm not saying this. I agree. I agree with you completely. Like I asked the question once, like, if your child committed a crime, right? If your child committed a crime, would you turn them in? And the answer is probably going to be for most people, it depends on what the crime is. Let's just be honest. You're not gonna like, okay, if your child did something egregious and heinous, you like, oh man, I can't live with this. Like that was fucked up, son. I'm sorry, man, but you're gonna have to eat this one. But if it was something like, oh, you did what? Ah, nah, we ain't going. Don't even worry about that, son. It's okay. It's okay. That's not that big of a deal. So it depends, and it was bad. I don't want to get too far into it because that we're gonna do that tomorrow. It was bad, but I think how can I put it? I look at nepotism issues a little bit differently as opposed to someone doing the wrong thing for like a non. I'm looking to see what this dog's doing. What you doing over there? Mikey, what you doing? Come here. Nepotism issues and ignorance and willful blindness is kind of this a separate category from just illegal activities without that nepotism nexus, okay? Because there are people who do the right thing 99.9% of the time. But when it comes to their child, they like, man, God, this dude's a fuck up. This dude's a fuck up. He out here using cocaine and doing all sorts of stuff. Like even with President Biden, he was like, "Oh, I'm not going to pardon." He was like, "I wouldn't pardon my son." Biden was like, "Oh, I wouldn't pardon my son," and that may or may not be true. I don't know, but I think nepotism issues are a little bit differently. That's my personal opinion. I'm gonna do a Jerry McQuire. Show me the money. That's funny. Okay, I agree. Both the budget frozen at both Dolton and Thornton. I don't think it's from the video that they had going on tonight. It's like I don't know if it's frozen, but it's at a standstill because she was raising hell about them not approving the budget, so they can't get it. Yes, and my child was told I'm not bailing you out for poor judgment. I agree, but every parent isn't like you. I've seen it 1,000 times. I mean, 16-year-olds, armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon, and their parents like, not my baby. My baby just I know they said that he had the gun in his bag, Mr. DFD, and it was a switch on it, but my baby don't got access to stuff like that. He singing the choir at the church. Then look at his picture when he was on the debate team. And I'm like, man, you just in my head, I'm just like, and when you do I remember this case I had. I remember a case I had, and it was a young guy. I want to say he was maybe 17 at the time, and was it a armed robbery. It might have been an armed robbery charge. So when you're entering a plea, we worked out a plea agreement. When you're entering a plea, as the defense attorney, I would stand up there and be like, Your Honor, we're here to enter the plea on behalf of my client, Mr. Gerard Smith, whatever the name is. But we would have to give synopsis of the facts as we see them. Your Honor, based on the facts that we have before us, and we would just go through and tell our version of the facts. And then after those versions of the facts, we just kind of sit down. And I remember I'm telling the version of the facts as we have them. And they aren't lies, they're just the facts as we have them. And then the prosecution goes up. And the prosecution goes up and tell their version of the facts as they have them. Now, two people can see the same thing, and both people have different stories. And when the prosecution went through and was telling their version of the facts, and their version of the facts had some accuracies, it was probably 75% accurate with the version that we gave. They used some different language that I would refuse to use for purposes of my client, but 75% of it messed up. It was a 25% kind of difference in what was going on. But as they were explaining that 25% difference, this kid's mother was just in the audience, just like, oh, gangs. No, not my baby. Like just like she's just having a complete and absolute utter denial of what potentially her son could be out there doing. So I think it's a little bit different when it comes to your child. Yeah. He got kicked off a bus and we were 2 hours from school. I told her sooner you get to walking, sooner you get home. I'm not taking off work early for your poor behavior. I agree completely, but everybody isn't like me. I told my son all the time when my son asked me when he was home and he would be, oh, I'm going out to a party. And he would be like, well, what time should I be home? I was like, you get home when you think you should get home. Just know that if something happened, you fit the description. You fit the description. And that was my way of telling them, you need to make good judgment. And if you do something stupid, I'm I'm a lawyer. I'm not your lawyer because you can't afford me and you broke. So so you're gonna have to figure it out on your own. That's just kind of how it goes. But everybody isn't like that. Some people they're gonna ride with their kids no matter how they some parents, if their kid took a dump on the floor during Thanksgiving, the first thing they're gonna say is, "Well, you always know he had a weak intestines. He could never hold nothing. Yeah, you always know my baby had a sensitive stomach. No matter how wrong they may be. How many get out of jail representations do your kids get? None. Absolutely not. Not one. For some stupid shit, like if it was something like, let's see, it has to be something that's really legitimate for me to be like what would I call legitimate? Okay. If let's say an example of okay, if my son got popped for something like this, I'm probably gonna be like, whatever. Let's say I don't know. My daughter was in school and they what 4 years apart, and somebody at her school was just picking on her, a boy. Or let's say my daughter got into a fight with a boy at school, and my son. I already know how my son, because he's that dude. My son will. Before he left, he would be like, "What? You need me to come up there? Is it okay?" Like, let's say my daughter's in school and she has a bully, and my son was like, "Wait, this bully is a guy," or my daughter got into a fight with a boy. If my son came to school and beat the hell out of some kid who was a couple years younger than him, but a couple years older than my daughter for something like that, oh nah, bro, what? Like, nah. I'm be like, Your Honor, this young man has substantial ties to the community. He's recently enrolled in college. I'm gonna be at his first appearance ASAP. So it's it for something that's stupid. You don't get no help from me. For something that's stupid, I'm like, nah, bro, you got to figure this one out on your own. So you're not gonna get a get out of jail free card. It's the same thing as like if I go into custody, it's gonna be me going into custody like somebody tried to like harm me or my family, something like that. I don't okay, the police, y'all don't gotta look for me. I'm be like, yeah, this dude came over here acting crazy. He came over here acting crazy, and I was scared for my life. I saw him reaching. But nah, like So generally, kids don't get out of jail free card. Like one of the things I told my son, it was doing a I think he got suspended at school for fighting or something. And it was hilarious because I don't know if y'all know, but if y'all been watching the channel for a while, my son been taking martial arts since he was like 3. So he like nice in taekwondo, nice in jujitsu, competing everything. So I never really was worried about him getting his ass whipped in a one-on-one fight. But he ends up getting suspended. And I remember sitting at the table I remember sitting at the table. I felt like it was a fight he could have avoided. That's why I was pissed off. And so I remember sitting at the table and I remember leaving out of there. And I said, I'm not fucking doing that again. Right. I said, I'm not doing that again because that felt weird. That felt like I was your client. You know what I mean? I'm not opposed to, fights happen. That's what it is. But if it's a fight that you can avoid and you fail to avoid it, no, I'm not going to do anything to try to lighten the sanction that you would get because that was something you could avoid. I'm like, well, you could have avoided it and you chose not to. So generally, kids aren't getting a get out of jail free card for me. Yeah. This is the live I've been looking for. Paul Roberts' comments were off the chart and started a chaos. I know I tuned into it. Shout out to Hannibal is Hungry because he streamed it live, and I tuned in for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and I saw Tiffany Henyard. She was on one. She was going ham in there, and it was pretty interesting. I was like, yeah, it's an absolute shit show. Mm. Sons asked, "What if it was my friends?" He was told, "If you are too dumb to leave, if they are doing criminal acts, then you are an accessory and will be waiting for your day in court." I agree. I agree with that 100%. Yeah, I saw the back end and it was passionate. I see. I'm gonna have to go check it out so we can talk about it on Friday. But generally, I look at I don't necessarily think someone is a bad hire if it's an issue related to their child. Now, it is indicative of maybe not having the best judgment, but I mean, do we think LeBron James had the best judgment when he got his son a job? No, that's LeBron James bringing his son on the Lakers was not in the best interest of LeBron James. It was not in the best interest of the Laker organization. But why did he do it? Because he's blind, because that's his son and he loves his son. And sometimes that happens. And sometimes it happens with conduct that probably should land kids in jail. Not my kids, excuse me, they just gonna have to get their toothbrush ready because daddy ain't doing it. But sometimes it happens. That's just what it is. Yo, I appreciate all y'all for tuning in. Tomorrow we're gonna talk about this cop, and we're gonna dive into we're gonna talk about tomorrow's show gonna be the nepotism show. We're gonna talk about the new top cop that Tiffany Henyard appointed, allegedly illegally. But tomorrow we're gonna talk about the nepotism show because I got a strange inclination that not everybody now common sense. I know you go like, nah, your kids do something stupid, but a lot of people, what's stopping Tiff from getting arrested or removed? What's stopping her from getting removed is the courts because the court said y'all didn't remove her correctly, so y'all can't remove her. And what's stopping her from getting arrested is the feds don't have to rush. They got all the time in the world. She keeps engaging in criminal conduct, and they keep getting new start dates for the statute of limitations clock to start. Is a beautiful thing. It's a win-win for the prosecution. He started madness. Now I got to go back and take a look at it. Does not know what 3 minutes means. Yo, I'm about to check out. Y'all have a good one. I appreciate y'all for tuning in. Friday, we're going to see what was up with that meeting. This apparently it was a shit show according to y'all, and we're going to dive in. Y'all be blessed and have a good night. Peace. That's funny.